All
So
right.
we're now moving to the second half of this morning's session. We did not record the first half, and we're going to open it with Alistair Donald, who is psychiatrist, practicing clinician, very actively practicing clinician, also a member of the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine. For anyone who's been in the Friday morning seminar for over these years will know Alistair. Anyone who is not should simply know that he is both an anthropologist with his PhD from University of California in San Diego, a psychiatrist and a practicing psychoanalyst. And he's been practicing in a setting as that is in very great contrast to many parts of the world. Alistair, just carry on from where you were beginning to go.
Yes, okay, so I was saying that our local government did try to get PPE equipment in when it was obvious there was going to be a problem, but the psychiatric hospitals were forgotten. I would put that somewhat in inverted commas with respect to any of the medical settings that needed PPE equipment. So the psychiatric hospitals really didn't get any masks for quite some time, essentially really getting them from Mr. Kraft, our owner of Byron's favorite baseball team, bringing them in from China, although they were not very good masks, and subsequently, sorry. And then subsequently, you know, people got them from various different sources. I got some from Mahong in China. So we were not really on the horizon as medical space. And I think that's quite interesting because, you know, psychiatry does sort of live in a little bit of a surreal space in terms of its sort of public health representation, very often from at least governmental public health. And we certainly didn't resent in a way the fact that if there were any masks, they would go to the ERs and to, you know, the bona fide medical people who need them for intubation, et cetera, et cetera. However, from my perspective, what has been so fascinating, firstly, is through various contacts, I became like a CIA spy into these Zoom meetings with public health and the Department of Mental Health in Massachusetts, which have been absolutely fascinating. Because the Department of Public Health and particularly the Department of Mental Health didn't seem to have a clue what to do about psychiatry and this virus. So public health and the Department of Mental Health were very resistant to even thinking. It was mostly, well, of course, you don't want to have COVID patients in your hospital, but you're going to have to figure out how to quarantine them when they're there. And so there was quite intense meetings between the private hospital system, which is an enormous provider of psychiatric services in Massachusetts, and the Department of Public Health, about how on earth psychiatric hospitals were going to quarantine anybody, because psychiatric hospitals are really community living spaces. We don't have single rooms very rarely, and if we do, it's to put somebody in who's about to kill other people. So it's a space where the virus can spread quite rapidly, just like a nursing home. But it's very interesting to me that public health doesn't want to think about that terribly much. There were very heated discussions about that with the head of mental health. One CEO of a 120-bed private psychiatric hospital threatened to close the child unit. DMH threatened to pull his license, and he told DMH to do it. And he closed the child unit, and DMH didn't pull his license, but it was very heated. And so now psychiatric hospitals do have COVID positive patients. We obviously are not going to keep a patient that our medical colleagues need to hospitalize, but we're under the stress of the fear of the Department of Mental Health that if we don't take patients, psychiatric patients out of the emergency rooms, those patients will build up in the emergency rooms and essentially stop the emergency room from operating. So now the Department of Mental Health, which is generally regarded as a schizophrenic mother, I know we don't think they exist, but they do exist bureaucratically, is telling us things, for example, you shouldn't take a COVID positive patient. You should take a COVID positive patient. You shouldn't admit anybody else to the unit. You should admit other people to the unit. No, you shouldn't admit other people to the unit. And it's going around and around in a circle. And it's a little bit crazy, crazy bureaucracy, actually, which is quite interesting, really. We also had the issue of stopping visitors. And that was not done rationally. Essentially, hospitals wanted to stop visitors because of the rational risk. And the Department of Mental Health hysterically threatened to pull licenses because that threatened the patient's right to visitors. And those issues were resolved eventually by the psychiatric hospital system saying, pull our license, we're stopping visitors. And they did, and the Department of Mental Health hasn't pulled any of the hospital's licenses, but it lies there as a contested issue between patient rights, which is an interesting kind of American idea, and the rationality of dealing with a pandemic. So it's a little bit schizophrenic right now. If you can imagine, you have a COVID positive patient who doesn't want to wear a mask, who's mad and angry and is spitting at people and hitting people, you've got a very difficult situation on a psych unit.
Is that it, Alistair? Thank you. That's really a terrific report from a situation that is very, very different than listening to stories from Hong Kong or China, and actually much closer, I would say, to what we may hear in a moment from Indonesia. Any comments about this? Michael, do you want to add any comments here?
No, I don't think so.
I had a question, a comment too. And sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I recall last week actually when talking about that experience in my inpatient geriatric psychiatry unit of how one of my patients became positive, and there was this the immediate transfer of that patient to the medical floor, but at the same time there was this kind of infectious disease had to mandated isolation of the rest of the patients, and there was no testing. Actually, they said, sorry, either there are no tests or this is not the priority. You just wait for 14 days to see if somebody gets sick. But interestingly, when DMH protested too, and they no, this is nobody said, how can we do it? I mean, what do we do? And there was no answer. It's like, well, we have these mandates, and it's true. The hospital or the unit just took a leap of faith and said, well, sorry, but we have to do it. We have to isolate patients. Mm-hmm. But until now, there is no communication with that agency. The agency remains like, no, these are the regulations. Patients need to have visitors. Patients have the right to watch TV together. They have the right to eat, and then you are taking it away. And it is without any really communication or thinking or consensus,
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. It's as if bureaucracy has gone insane.
or afraid, because it seems that I think that they have been fighting for so long for, regulations and supposedly enhance the rights of the patients, but at the same time saying now, oh, if we back up now, it's going to be taken away. And they are basically right now, is no, don't ask, don't tell them, we don't want to hear about this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I actually think that the Department of Public Health and DMH is throwing up its hands in the face of, if you like, it's a microcosm of opening the country, because essentially all of this talk about quarantine inside these units, which they didn't have an answer to either and were quite irrational about, is now like, well, admit patients to a quarantined unit. That raises other medical legal issues. Do you tell patients in the ER that they're going to a unit with somebody with a COVID positive test? I mean, you can imagine the lawsuits in the future, which are freaking out the CEOs. So, but in a way, DMH is saying, well, it doesn't matter anymore. If you have a COVID positive patient, you can admit other patients to your unit, is essentially opening your country to business. And I think DMH doesn't know what to do. And they have COVID through all the public hospitals now. So we can't discharge people because we've got nowhere to discharge them to. So the whole psychiatric system is essentially almost come to a, it's not quite, but it's getting towards a standstill because of tremendous irrationality at the bureaucratic level, which is fascinating.
Which at the same time, I have to say that that lack of, basically that silence has been refreshing. I mean, I use the word refreshing to the point is, okay, we do what makes sense. Okay, thank you, bye.
Yes.
Yeah, which has been like a, you know, what is common sense, and yes, certainly communication with the rest of our hospital, but making decisions based on what is the appropriate thing, at least in that particular moment, in that particular hospital.
Yes, so we have that feeling too. It's like escaping the totalitarian state.
Yep. But at the same time, what we see sometimes, the other type of state that is also organized, even though totalitarian in its own way, and saying you have to follow this and that, like what happened in Hong Kong, sometimes that is, well, it is missed and is necessary in some situations in human life, like, you know.
Right. Yeah. So to me, that's the interesting thing, because with individual patients, how the imaginary of the COVID thing works, it sometimes works as a sort of a superego threat. At other times, it's like a dreamlike state into which all kinds of other fantasies get projected. And it's almost like the bureaucracy is doing the same thing with, you know, in inverted commas, the bureaucratic unconscious right now is just throwing different stuff up into their strategy plans, which are so irrational. It's quite fascinating. Anyhow, that's what I have to say.
Beth has some interesting comments that are on the chat. Would Seth like to make a comment?
Yeah, so Shelley's in here in the room with me, and she was listening to Alistair, and she just commented that, you know, it was the same situation here in Riverside County, where Department of Mental Health and Public Health just completely neglected that whole sector as well. So it was just echoing exactly, you know, what Alistair was saying, but it's also happening here in California.
Well, and you mentioned about homelessness, that outreach workers are.
Yeah, they sent people out into the field to deal with homeless populations with no protection. This was just as of, you know, not too many weeks ago. And so we're really upset about that.
I think this would be a good segue into what Indonesia is doing. So maybe start with Bu Siwi, and then to Sandeep.
Or shall we start with Sandeep? Siwi, shall we start?
I think Sandeep can continue with the
okay.
About the psychiatric hospital.
Okay, so let's actually begin, and let me introduce Sandeep, and then Mary Jo will introduce our colleague Bu Siwi. For those of you,
Mahar is also on. Mahar is also on.
Oh, but Mahar is also on, right? Psychiatrist, practicing psychiatrist from Jogja. So Sandeep, for those of you who were around in recent years will remember was here at Harvard as a master's in medical science student working on a variety of issues, but is himself, number one, a physician, a graduate of Gadjah Mada University. Secondly, has for many years been an activist for issues of improving quality of care for people with HIV/AIDS in Indonesia. Then came and spent 2 years working on his master's degree, focusing really on the mental health system, but in particular on the rehab side of the mental health system in Jogja. And then when he returned after the master's degree, took up a project at UNFPA for youth health. And he's now sequestered, not as a clinician, though he's in touch with a lot of clinicians, but in Jakarta. And so we'd like to carry on the kind of style we've had, which is a report from yet another front. And Sandeep, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I have actually got two lists here. One list is a list of funny things that has happened, and I'm just going to mention one funny thing that has happened in Jakarta in the COVID situation. There's a lot of politicians who send out hand sanitizers with their faces in it. And it's really funny how they stick their faces in the hand sanitizers and share to public. And it's quite a sight to see having politicians' faces in the hand sanitizer. And faces is a really important thing in politics of Indonesia. But back to the serious things. I have a whole list which I'm making of really funny things that has happened. But perhaps that's for a more lighter and later time. But here I have like 6 points in which this is what I usually think about. And these are usually my anxieties when I go to sleep. What to do tomorrow? How do we get this done? And how do we get that done? The first thing that is in my head, the number 1 point, which is actually an evolving antiretroviral stock crisis in major cities in Indonesia. We found out last week that in a clinic in Bali had to close. The clinic was serving 1,000 HIV positive patients. The clinic had to close because there was no medication, ARV, antiretroviral. But nobody knew that it was a problem. Like how problems are in Indonesia, it usually erupts. And usually people like me have to like scream and shout for it to erupt. So we decided to lead a national scale survey, a community-based survey of ARV stock. And the results is really kind of unbelievable. We will have an article in Lancet out soon. It's unbelievable because you have up to 2,000 people in Bali itself. So I'm just sharing data from Bali and Jogja because we've just analyzed those 2 sites because they were pilot sites. We have 2,000 people in Bali getting ARV only per 10 days. So they have to go to the hospital every 10 days because of the stock out. And then you have 600 people who have lost to follow up. We don't know where they are. They are not taking ARVs anymore. And then in Jogja, we have 1,000 people, HIV positive people, taking ARV medication every 10 days. And some even every week from the health centers. And this has created a profound anxiety amongst the key populations affected, over with other economic anxieties because many of them are actually marginalized and working in the streets. So this is really a big issue that I'm thinking about. And the problem here, perhaps like what Alistair mentioned, is I've been speaking to really high level authorities in the Ministry of Health in many places, and I'm often like told to shift places. Oh, you should speak to that person. Oh, no, it's not this person. Speak to that person. And people are not really acknowledging that this is a real issue. And to me, that is a big problem, and therefore we've made the survey a quick rapid assessment, a community-based rapid assessment, where community members in 32 districts in Indonesia, all across Indonesia, are going to go to the health centers and ask them how many times, what's their stock like and we are just getting all of this data in, and it's going to be a national crisis, just an impending crisis happening. We have a op-ed out in Lancet HIV, but we have a media strategy with local media as well to talk about this issue. So that's to me a really stressful thing. So tonight, as we are talking, I just bought ARV from the online shop, a black market, to just have stock. And also I've asked my friends from Australia who are HIV positive and from Thailand to send in and post their medication, just so that we have stock here. So that's the first anxiety I have currently. And we hope that people will think that it is a crisis soon. And then the second anxiety I have is just the severe socioeconomic insecurity of my elderly transgender friends in Jogja. I founded an HIV shelter, and now it has received good funding actually from a pharmaceutical company. And many of the outreach services is still going on. Many elderly transgenders still have severe heart failure that requires emergency heart attack, strokes. There's still all those cases happening. They still perform. But the severe socioeconomic insecurity. So imagine we calculated one person spends about $6 a week for food and another $6 for their weekly rent, because they pay rent weekly. And so if we identify 360 transgender in Yogyakarta, so that will be about 50,000 US. That's our target of how much money we want to raise. And I've written a lot of proposals. Some of them have been granted, and we've reached only about a fourth. And my other anxiety is to speak with community members and how do we ration what we have. If we get only half of the money, how do we give? Who is prioritized? Are the older ones, sicker ones? That's another question. So I don't know the answer yet to that. That's still a question. So that's another anxiety. The third anxiety is, and this is through my work in UNFPA, we have a program from midwives in Yogyakarta. They are woke midwives, private practicing midwives, and they provide essentially very sensitive kind of care, provision of contraception to adolescents, and post-abortion care, abortion and post-abortion care. And we've seen the hotline. So usually the good thing is that people do self-abortion in Indonesia. The pills are widely available in online shops, but they usually need the hotline, which we provide. And the numbers in the hotline has increased dramatically. So we have a lot of cases of poor families who don't want to be pregnant, knowing that the economy is really bad. And so many of them are, and the line is completely full. And the midwives operating the line, helping them to get self-abortion is completely jammed up, and they're completely stressed. So I'm trying to get someone in the mental health world to help the midwives to think about it. But again, because it's a very sensitive service delivery, I have to really vet the professional, the psychologist. I can't just ask anyone to support the midwives. So I have to really vet them. And so I'm in the process of vetting a few people to, if they can really provide support for the midwives who have this increased demand for post-abortion and abortion care, which I really don't know why as well. So I'm still figuring that out. And the last is actually the mental health stuff with people with schizophrenia. And so there's another one as well, but that's not that important. The mental health stuff is, so I recently looked at the consumer group that was already existing, but turns out they didn't have a legal entity, so they cannot raise funds. And so we had this 2 weeks arranging that legal entity amidst COVID, and we had to like pay a lawyer to do all of that legal entity for a consumer group in Indonesia. And there's so many issues identified, like and I echo Alistair that some people are actually happy. I've actually spoken to a few people with schizophrenia who are happy about the crisis. They say, I'm loving it, being alone and no one disturbing me. And the families are also stressed, so they don't disturb them to like take medications, but the access to medications is also a huge problem. Not so much the stock, but people don't want to go to the hospital. They're too afraid. We identified about 80 now, but we are getting more people whose caregiver usually is elderly, and they're very, very scared to go to the hospital, and that's something. But fortunately, and this is out of the blues, the president's office has taken up mental health as a priority, and almost all issues, all programs from the government, at least the central government, has been repurposed to mental health. So under the Office of the President, they have released a suicide hotline. They have a telepsychiatry service on free of charge now, and we are welcoming that. So in the next weeks, I'm speaking with Bagus, who's the leader of this group, to really test out these services and see the quality of these services. So we want to be dummy patients and just test out whether whether the hotline works, whether the telepsychiatry works, and so on. But there's been massive investment, and directly not under the Ministry of Health. It's really under the Gugus Tugas, or the presidential office. What is also interesting is in every disaster, there's a subcluster system, and there's the mental health subcluster, and there's a psychosocial subcluster. And oftentimes they are separated. Like the psychosocial subcluster will be under the Ministry of Social Affairs, and the mental health subcluster will be under the Ministry of Health. But now it's become one under the President's office, and so many new players in mental health. And it's kind of, to me, a very refreshing thing to see. So I'm very looking forward to joining a lot of these Zoom meetings with them to see where the government money has been repurposed. And the last anxiety I have, maybe the previous one was more of an excitement, but the last anxiety I have is I've been developing this life skill education program for the past 2 years. And now all of it has been cut because all the money has been repurposed for COVID response. And so you have to start from you have to start from scratch. And so you have to mourn all these programs, including all the advocacy work in Jogja for the government to support the transgender community with their money. All of it has stopped because all of the money has been repurposed for COVID. And so it's kind of a mourning for myself who've designed this program for the past 2 years and completely stopped now. So outside the very, very selfish kind of reflections, the actual COVID situation is also really bad. We have so there's this really case that has gone viral. And this shows exactly what Indonesian bureaucracy, and Byron and Mary Jo knows very well how Indonesian bureaucracy works. So this guy is from Jakarta. He goes to Tegal. He suspects he has a disease. He goes to the primary healthcare in Tegal. The primary healthcare says, okay, you do a rapid test. And then he's tested positive in the rapid test. And then in Tegal, the primary physician had to find a hospital. None of the hospitals wanted to take him because they were not the right level. Then he had to travel 5 hours to Banyumas. When the Banyumas hospital agreed to take him, but then when they saw all the doctors in full gear, in the emergency room, the Banyumas doctor was afraid to take this patient, and then he was referred to a place near Banyumas where the cousin of the family of the patient is in Cilacap. And so they went another hour to Cilacap, and there's finally where the person got treatment. That is just an example of how terrible the bureaucracy is. It took about 36 hours for the person to get treatment. And that case went viral. We have really poor testing, only 70,000 tests conducted now. And the mortality statistics cannot be trusted at all because we have data from the Jakarta municipality that says that the mortality is 4 times higher than normal baseline. So there are 4 times more people dying, and we only have that data. My colleague is working, there are 433 data portals from each district, and now the central government has to try to get all of the 433 data portals into one data that we can actually look at to plan. And so a colleague of mine is working on that 400. So that's just kind of the crazy, messy, decentralized, bureaucratic state that we live in. but I'm optimistic we can get some attention from the media. I think the issue of the ARV drugs can be resolved in the next 2-3 weeks. It's a matter of the drugs is in India, so we need to get a plane from India to Jakarta. So that's the problem. But outside that, I'm pretty excited about the mental health work, the interest and the new players. That's what's keeping me and allowing me to sleep. At least that's from me. That's from me.
Sandeep, thank you. Just add a word about, we know a number of, that there have been a lot of not only illness positive tests, but also persons who have died among physicians, among healthcare providers. Would you just say a word about that situation?
Yeah, so what was really sad to see was a lot of physicians. So there's about I think now it's up to 40 the count, but maybe Bu Siwi can speak more because there was someone really close to Bu Siwi too. And this has, what is interesting is that we have it reminds me a lot of Hans's book. We have this really online movement from doctors, and they have called for their own donations for PPE. And that has been really, really successful. Really, we have these online doctor influencers working in different ways to gather attention. And I think that this new way of looking at online activism and is really something I've not seen before, especially amongst doctors. So they get money for PPE, and their posts are really kind of sentimental and really kind of an interesting side to it. But Bu Siwi could speak more about the doctor influencers and how they get traction to get money.
We should move to Siwi. So let me introduce Bu Siwi. Actually, Dr. Ratna Padmawati, who is the director of behavioral health and health promotion in the Department of Public Health within the Faculty of Medicine at Gadjah Mada University. We first met in 1996 and have been colleagues. At that time, Siwi was doing her anthropology. She had finished her anthropology degree from the Philippines, and she was the anthropologist in England. And the program in biostatistics and epidemiology. And she then went on to study the culture of medicine, smoking, disasters, earthquakes, end of life, and is looking at the complications of the national health insurance known as BPJS, and it's extraordinary bureaucratic stories around BPJS. So Siwi, let's hear from you.
Thank you very much, Bu Merijo. Hi, all of you. This is almost the middle of the night here. So I would like to talk about actually very different with what Sandeep presented, because I'm now already locked in my village, and it's like 5 kilometers, or no, not 5 kilometers, 12 kilometers from the campus. And yeah, but actually we are having so many conversations, so many communication with campus, because campus is completely locked down since 16 March. Yeah, but when I'm actually in Yogyakarta, and Yogyakarta, as you know, is a special city in Central Java with we call it the Central for Javanese culture. So we have our king, our sultan as our governor for already 31 years. Yeah, And then the vice governor is also a prince, yeah, a small kingdom in Yogyakarta. What I would like to say is about the people in the village, yeah, and also maybe some also in the campus around the hospital. When 1 week after the president announced the positive corona patients were found in Jakarta, Yogyakarta was actually shocked because the social media said that one professor of Gadjah Mada University was actually my colleague, my close friend, Sandip's professor, yeah, was actually confirmed positive. And then at that time, the Gadjah Mada announced that we have to work from home, yeah, on the middle of March. But it is actually not until the Sultan's announcements of school closing that got everybody aware of, or cautious about the virus. Yeah. So at the time, Sultan actually has a speech as a gesture to greet people that we are together and facing this disease, because Yogyakarta is known as, we have so many calamities. We have Merapi volcano, which is very active, the most active in the world, I think, among the most active volcano in the world. And then also with big eruption nearly every 5 years, yeah. And then we had earthquakes, yeah. Being hardest was in the 2006, yeah. And at this time also, Merapi is smoking, yeah. So people thought that at that time, yeah, the earthquake was volcanic, but it's turned to be tectonic. So it's very confusing at that time, yeah. Then at that time, Sultan actually assured that we can get through this together, something like that. So then when the Sultan announced about the virus and also there is a local term for the disaster. We call it pagebluk, yeah. So there was a rumor that Sultan ordered people in Yogyakarta to cook or to eat a special dish, which is believed to ward off misfortune. Yeah. So whether the rumors was true or untrue, Yogyakarta people obey the king very strongly. So they started preparing this meal and then they distributed to the people also in the community. So, but individually, people bought masks, hand sanitizers, vitamins, and food in box, yeah. A little bit panic buying, something like that. But in groups, people gathered money to buy disinfectants so that every house in the neighborhood can be sprayed with disinfectant. And eventually, mask and disinfectant became scarce, yeah, and people tried to create their own, our own disinfectant, for instance, those which be used for poultry or for other animals, like that. So in every village, we have like a kit with automatic disinfectant. When there is someone pass, then there is spray like that in every kit in the village. So I probably also have the picture, but now in Kampung, in my neighborhood, and many others, actually, people closed the small alleyways and kept only the main road open. On the entrance, people, especially youngsters, took turns to check any incoming visitors. And visitors will be checked whether they are from other cities. So if they're from other cities, they have to do self-quarantine. And then what is the purpose of the visit, how long they are going to stay, whether they have fever or whether they have wearing mask or, and so on. And then if the visitors were from Jakarta or West Java, they were asked to self-quarantine for 14 days, and people in the neighborhood will provide food for them. So this is a kind of resilience. And then also what Sandeep said about the PPE shortage in the hospital, people here actually also collectively try to provide PPE and preparing meals for those on the front line. So every day somebody send meals or foods to the hospital and also send PPE. For instance, my friends in the Faculty of Economy gathered so PPE from Jakarta, from Bali, and from many other places, and then sent to Sarjito Hospital or our academic hospital. And then even local tailors that are actually temporary out of job, they were given materials so that they can also make their the PPE by local tailors. So, and non-medical mask, yeah, mainly out of cotton, also provided by the local tailors, yeah. So many, and then they can be distributed free for the cab drivers, street vendors, sellers, and security workers, for instance, like that. So, and then also in some places, a lot of people put groceries outside their fence, yeah, so that people can also get it for free, yeah. Many housing complexes also encourage the residents to collect money and rice for later use by themselves if there is someone should be provided with food because they have to be self-quarantine. So other than that, the university actually also formed a task force, yeah, to educate people with correct information. So many informations were incorrect. For instance, virus will be prevented if you go to the sun at 10 o'clock or 12 o'clock, something like that, for 1 hour, something like that. So this is that kind of information that is tried actually by the university to deal with, because so many what incorrect informations, what we call hoax information. And then we have also recruiting volunteers, train the volunteers online, and also doing some webinar Zooms with the volunteers, yeah. And then, well, actually in brief, our collective culture is proven to be beneficial amid this pandemic. So Yogyakarta, people are able to build their own resilience, which is based on solidarity and sense belonging, which result to the community empowerment. But of course, we are in the face of what the disaster management said, heroism and honeymoon stages, when so many people would like to contribute and donate, but we don't know what will be happening if the situation continues or lasts longer, yeah. So we are now actually preparing for that, discussing for what will be done with if the scenario. So we have so many scenarios. For instance, if the disaster will, the crisis will end on the 3 months or 6 months or next year, something like that. So we are still discussing on that. Well, about the universal health coverage, all of the patients actually got it free from the government. So the BPJS, I think, is work hand in hand with the government, because all of the the patient will be given free treatment. And also for some tests, rapid tests is also free in the government institution, but not in the private institution. So this is the kind of what is happening in Yogyakarta right now, but also in the initial, but we hope that it will not be very long crisis. Yeah. Okay. So I think, thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. Is Mahar still here? Mahar? Is Mahar here? Byron, can you see?
Yeah.
Mahar.
Yes,
Yeah.
Jim,
Hello.
would you like to add?
Yeah.
Very,
I think hello. I think everything already mentioned by Bu Siwi, but one thing that I have to tell to all of you, that one thing that make us as a medical staff sad, that there are some medical staffs get sick and pass away because of coronavirus. Yeah, and I think the number of the medical doctor who passed away because of this is around 30. Yeah, and the number every day add with 1 or 2 medical doctors. It make me very sad. Yeah. Moreover, when they send to the cemetery, nobody can accompany him. I think it is unusual culture in Indonesia.
Mm.
And the other thing that is very unique, that the family of the doctor is much more panic than the medical doctor her or himself. And it is proof that when he or she come home, the family member and even the neighbor reluctant to let the medical doctor enter to the home. Before the bath, and after bathing, they can enter the home. Yeah.
So they're bathing outside.
Yeah, bathing outside. Yeah. Outside the house. Usually we have bathroom outside the house. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Mahar.
I think Bu Mary Jo can ask me as a wife of medical doctor who maybe feel panic also. So every day she warned me to be careful when we go to the hospital. Yeah.
Is Bu Ninik? Is Ninik on also?
On also, yeah.
Ninik, do you want to just comment? So
it's 12 o'clock.
Yeah, so I think we'll stop here. Let's try and adhere to an agreement that we will continue and stop. We didn't get to Joe Gone, who I know came on and was planning to talk about the situation in American Indian communities. I had already anticipated that we had overbooked ourselves and asked Andrea and Melissa to join next week when Orchidea is going to join us and talk about the situation in Iran. So we'll include at least those two next week. And I just think this rather both partly formal and partly informal reporting from various places, including by clinicians, including by public health specialists, et cetera, has been really wonderfully done. And I thank those of you who contributed today. I think it's great. Again, I want, for those of you who weren't here when I said this was supposed to be a May 1 event celebrating Mary Jo, and we still celebrate her, for her having kept this seminar running for all of these now almost 30 years.
More than 30 years.
30, that's actually 35 years.
Yeah.
35 years of keeping this Friday morning seminar running and together. And we will meet again next week. The following week we will not, but at the moment the plan is then to meet again at least a time or two after that. So thank you all for joining. Mary Jo, any more words?
Thank you all for joining. You've enriched the lives of so many around Harvard and kept a great community going. And if you would like to write email to Sadek or start a blog or something like that, we welcome you. Some of you, I'm not sure who you are, and we welcome you to join in and send a little bio sketch. And perhaps we can circulate that later on to people just to know who's joining and so that you get to know each other. So thank you very, very much. And thank you for the greetings many of you have sent. It has been generational enrichment. Thank you.
Michael, a word?
Unmute.
Unmute.
Yep. Just a word of thanks to everyone. These have been really wonderful presentations, and being able to think with them in comparative perspective and how things are operating differently in different places is a real gift to us all. So thank you very, very much.
And special thanks to people for calling in from and coming in so late at night. For those of you who are in the Asia Pacific region.
Thank you, Priscilla.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you, Siwi in particular.
Thank you all.
And we look forward to seeing you all next week.
And thanks to Sadek for getting this Zoom up and running.
Yes,
Yeah, no problem. Guys, bye, everybody. I will be sending out the information of where you can access the file, just like last time. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Siwi.
Bye.
Mariela.
Ciao, ciao.
Hi there, kids.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Mariela, ciao.
Bye. Buona serata, buonanotte a tutti.
So Mariela, do you want to go say something for next week? Do we have plans if we do a run of a
next week or in the next 2 weeks? If